Sweat beaded on the princess's forehead. She had been warned in advance. She would not be alone. The prince was free to choose other women for the night, while she was expected to endure it all with quiet resignation. Augusta was born in the first half of the 18th century to Magdalena Augusta of Anhalt-Zerbst and Friedrich II, Duke of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg. Although the Friedenstein Palace, where she grew up, was beautiful, the small duchy held little weight in European politics. Besides, Augusta was merely the 15th child in the family. No one expected her to make a successful marriage or achieve great things. She lived a comfortable, yet unremarkable life. Her parents sought a low-ranking but somewhat respectable suitor, and Augusta accepted her unenviable fate. It was doubly painful for the young girl to know just how beautiful she was. A true German beauty. Her thick, golden hair cascaded down her back, and her snow-white face, paired with bright, light eyes, set her apart from her peers. She was neither too thin nor too plump, possessing an attractive, feminine figure. At the age of 12, after her father's death, she moved with her mother to a new suburban palace. Augusta's fate changed at the age of 16 when King George II of Great Britain, during a trip to nearby Hanover, requested a meeting with her. He was searching for a suitable match for his headstrong son, Frederick, Prince of Wales and heir to the British throne. Augusta and her mother could hardly believe their luck. What an honor to have caught the attention of the royal family. From their very first meeting, the king was enchanted by the German girl. She was beautiful, modest, and kind-hearted. However, while the king was thrilled at the prospect of a future daughter-in-law, his wife, Queen Caroline, was not. She referred to Augusta's lovely long blonde hair as something like the color of a sheep. Augusta's mother and her brother, Friedrich III, eagerly approved of the marriage, pushing her into the arms of the crown prince. Augusta complied. While her relatives were driven by ambition, she longed for a faithful and loving husband rather than a golden crown. Upon arriving in England, Augusta found herself utterly unprepared for court life. The naive girl opened her heart to every kind person she met. Many aristocrats were displeased with the future Princess of Wales, who spoke not a word of English. As fate would have it, she only knew her native German. At a certain point, Queen Caroline sent her lady-in-waiting and friend, Lady Erwin, to accompany her future daughter-in-law. Through Lady Erwin, Caroline conveyed that Augusta would be much happier at the English court if she accepted her future husband's extramarital affairs. The Queen asked me to advise the princess to avoid jealousy and to be accommodating in matters of love, Lady Erwin relayed. Augusta was taken aback. She hadn't expected to marry an unfaithful husband, especially with a sharp-tongued mother-in-law thrown into the mix. Frederick, Prince of Wales, was 29 years old. He was a charming man with wheat-colored hair, a fair complexion, and gray eyes, like a cat's. However, his figure was disproportionate. A strong upper body rested on thin legs, as he suffered from rickets. Additionally, his difficult childhood had left its mark on his character. He grew up without parents in Hanover while they enjoyed their reign in England. Like his fiancée, he was also German. His father, King George II, was born in Hanover, and his mother Caroline was a native princess of Brandenburg-Ansbach. So it was no surprise that the royal family spoke German among themselves, much to the displeasure of their English subjects. Frederick developed a taste for drinking, gambling, women, and music. The flamboyant prince, who moved to England at his father's command, was seen by some as a charismatic figure and by others as a self-absorbed fool. Caroline regarded her firstborn as a mistake of nature. After arriving in England, she gave birth to a second son, William, the future Duke of Cumberland, whose arrival filled the emotional void left by Frederick's absence. After Frederick moved to England, the indifferent Caroline was appalled by her eldest son's behavior. She called him a miserly, insignificant, and vile man, labeling him the greatest fool and the greatest beast in the world. However, while Caroline had other children to whom she could direct her love, Frederick had no second mother. Although he indulged in the pleasures of London's brothels and was a carefree prince, he was not devoid of an appreciation for literature and music, especially the cello. He viewed his parents as traitors and morally bankrupt individuals, and it was clear that mending the relationship between father, mother, and son was impossible. The entire royal court was aware of the mutual grievances the royal family held against one another. Caroline was right to warn Augusta about Frederick's penchant for women. His little black book was overflowing with names, including both noblewomen and casual flings, from maids to one-night stands for a couple of silver coins. Perhaps this was the true reason Augusta was chosen as Frederick's bride. All the suitable candidates had fled upon learning of the Prince of Wales's romantic escapades, while Augusta was modest and submissive. Although she held a status that matched Frederick's as the daughter and sister of a ruling duke, her family had little money and even less influence in society. Frederick had a long-standing affair with Jane, Lady Archibald Hamilton. She captivated the Prince of Wales, despite not being a great beauty, and bore him 10 children in lawful wedlock. The exact nature of their relationship is unclear, but Jane's husband preferred to believe that his wife had only a friendly and intellectual connection with the prince. Frederick grew fond of Augusta's fate and showed affection and understanding toward his young fiancée. He was touched that she was willing to give up her quiet existence in Germany for a public life as a member of the British royal family. Despite his carefree image, Frederick supported his fiancée after her arrival in London. He embraced and protected her from the court's jabs and public scrutiny. For a moment, Augusta even questioned the warnings of her future mother-in-law. The truth was that Frederick genuinely liked Augusta, and he was eager to marry her so that Parliament would increase his annual allowances for expenses and he could appear as a family man in the eyes of the public. Even before their marriage, Frederick and Augusta capitalized on the newspapers covering royal events. The perceptive Frederick understood that if he and Augusta presented themselves in the right light, they could genuinely become objects of national support. As soon as Augusta and Frederick stepped out onto the balcony together for the first time, the crowd erupted into loud applause. The fact that Frederick and Augusta dined in public not once, but twice on the day before their wedding was a powerful statement of their intent to continue showcasing their openness to their subjects. Much like the modern royal family, it was nothing more than a PR move. If it were up to them, they would have barricaded themselves in their palaces. The royal wedding took place in April of 1736. Augusta made her way to the groom in a carriage drawn by 6 cream-colored horses, greeted by thunderous applause. At St. James's Palace, she was met by Frederick. As she approached him, she curtsied to kiss his hand, but Frederick caught her and honored her with a bow of his head. Augusta was adorned in a lavish gown made of silver fabric, richly embroidered and decorated with fringes. A tiara sparkling with diamonds crowned her head. Over her dress, she wore a mantle of crimson velvet trimmed with fur. The princess's train was carried by 4 bridesmaids dressed in silver gowns and adorned with diamonds. The ceremony was truly extravagant. Caroline wrinkled her nose slightly upon learning that she would have to translate the vows for the bride, as Augusta did not speak English. The final event was the bedding ceremony. The bride was undressed, helped into her nightgown, and escorted to the marital bed, where Frederick joined her in a nightgown made of silver fabric and a cap of the finest lace. The bride and groom admired each other, sitting in bed, surrounded by the entire royal family. The Queen's favorite, Lord Hervey, a gossip enthusiast, wryly remarked that the prince's ridiculous nightcap was taller than any grenadier's hat, and since Augusta looked fresh the next morning, it seemed likely that the prince had slept soundly and had nothing to impress his wife. Frederick's affection for Augusta did not mean that Lady Jane Hamilton had exited the scene. She was appointed as Augusta's lady-in-waiting. Caroline worried that the appointment of her son's favorite to such a position would cause a scandal, but Augusta took her mother-in-law's advice to heart, perhaps even too much. She agreed to have Lady Archibald as her lady-in-waiting, and the two later became close friends. Augusta quickly realized the importance of being seen as someone who appreciated all things British, and the simplest way to achieve that at the time was through her clothing. French fashion was very much in vogue among aristocrats, not only in England but throughout Europe. Dresses were regularly sent from Paris to London, St. Petersburg, and Constantinople. Augusta skillfully avoided the fanciful French styles favored by Caroline and her court, opting instead for exclusively English dresses. After the wedding, Frederick and Augusta further solidified their commitment to domestic industry by banning French goods from their presence. A year later, Frederick wrote to his mother, informing her that Augusta was pregnant. Caroline openly expressed her belief that Frederick was impotent, so the news of the pregnancy came as a shock to her. She was inclined to think her son was lying. Caroline suspected that the supposed pregnancy was a ruse to pass off another child as her son's. At that time, Augusta was ordered to give birth at Hampton Court, in the presence of her mother-in-law. Frederick and his parents ceased all communication, even though they continued to live under the same roof at Hampton Court and St. James's Palace. Augusta's labor pains began on the evening of a Sunday at the end of July. Frederick made an unusual, impulsive decision. He grabbed his wife and took her to St. James's Palace. Augusta's waters broke before Frederick could get her out of the house. She was in excruciating pain. Her ladies-in-waiting warned Frederick against acting rashly, while Augusta screamed in agony, begging her husband to reconsider. They then embarked on a dreadful journey, covering a little over 20 kilometers along a bumpy road in just over an hour. By the time they reached St. James's, Augusta's skirt was soaked in blood. Frederick ordered the candles extinguished so that no one would see this unsightly scene. Upon their arrival, absolutely no preparations had been made at the palace. The furniture was covered in dusty sheets, and the beds were dismantled and damp. When Augusta arrived, she needed sheets, but there were none to be found. The princess was laid on a bed between two tablecloths. Lady Archibald hurried off in search of napkins, hot water bottles, and all the necessary supplies. The princess gave birth to a girl so tiny that she was described as a little rat. It was highly likely that the child was premature. The king was furious that his son had left Hampton Court, while Caroline silently dressed and rushed to St. James's Palace in a carriage. Caroline was horrified to see the newborn girl. "God bless you, poor little creature," she exclaimed, looking at her unfortunate granddaughter. "You've entered a dreadful world." The fragility of the baby at least convinced Caroline that the newborn belonged to her son. Distressed by Frederick's behavior, Caroline called a council. The assembled group labeled Frederick a scoundrel and a pup, a rogue and a fool, a liar and a coward, who had put his wife and child in danger. The king and queen decided that their negligent son and his wife should be evicted from St. James's Palace as soon as Augusta was healthy enough to move. Augusta accepted her fate with remarkable humility. She did not defy either her husband or her mother-in-law, displaying surprising resilience for her age. A shy girl, not prone to arrogance, she showed an incredible ability to handle adversity. By the time her daughter was born, she had quickly learned English and was able to converse freely with courtiers and subjects. Her language skills far surpassed those of any royal family member, despite her having been in the country for less than a year. Augusta's letters to her in-laws reflect her ability to blend respect with determination. In her correspondence, she pleaded with the king and queen to understand her husband's actions. The final step in the breakdown of family relations, which many at court sought to avoid, was the complete separation of the two households. Given the precarious finances of the prince and princess, they turned their eyes toward Cliveden to establish a new family home. One day, Queen Caroline fell ill. Initially, her ailment was thought to be a more serious recurrence of gout. George, sensing that the situation was far more serious, refused to leave his wife's side. The royal physicians prescribed the standard treatments of the time, bloodletting and inducing vomiting. After Caroline had been bedridden for several days, it became clear that her illness was actually the result of a hernia that had developed during one of her pregnancies. Upon hearing that his mother was dying, Frederick hurried to London. The king refused to let his son in. He told Caroline that he had denied their son entry to the palace and offered to reverse that decision if she wished, but Caroline replied that she did not want to see him. Caroline urged George to seek another wife, but through tears, he replied that he could not. She passed away without reconciling with her son, and her death plunged the king into deep sorrow. Caroline's death left Augusta in a unique position. In just over a year, the modest girl from Saxe-Gotha had become, if not a true queen, at least the undisputed First Lady of the nation. Another year later, at Norfolk House in London, Augusta gave birth to her second child, the future George III. Frederick and Augusta enjoyed their domestic happiness. Despite their evident affection for one another, the couple lived relatively independently, as was customary at the time. They would have breakfast in their rooms, where coffee or hot chocolate was brought to them along with bread, butter, and pastries. Augusta's favorite drink was served not in the morning but after dinner, either in the drawing room, where she would brew it herself in a silver teapot. When Augusta wasn't hosting formal dinners, she loved to dine outdoors or brew tea on the terrace. Finally, George II issued an official declaration naming Frederick as his successor. However, despite all these preparations, the long-awaited coronation of Augusta and Frederick was not meant to be. Frederick fell ill after spending the entire day in the garden until nightfall, in damp rain and hail, to check on his workers. For 2 weeks, the prince suffered from severe pain in his side, accompanied by fever and fainting spells. Augusta, upset and pregnant with her 9th and final child, stayed by the prince's bedside throughout his brief and painful illness. Frederick died at the age of just 44. Rumors circulated that he had died from a cricket ball strike, but in reality, he succumbed to a blood clot in his lungs. King George, despite his complicated relationship with his son, was devastated. From that moment on, he had no one left but his daughter-in-law and grandchildren. While George had other children, he understood that the rightful claim to the throne would belong to Augusta's and Frederick's offspring. Frederick's death was a crushing blow for Augusta. At the age of 31, she became a widow. The throne and the title of Queen Consort were now out of reach for her. From then on, she was Augusta, the Dowager Princess of Wales. Augusta had been associated with the opposition party of the Prince of Wales, so she ordered all documents to be burned to avoid falling into disfavor with George II. Her father-in-law assured Augusta that he supported her guardianship over young George and that he would make his grandson the heir. He even promised that he would not appoint Frederick's brother, William, as his successor. He agreed that, should he die before George came of age, Augusta herself would serve as regent. However, rumors of an alleged affair with George Bute, her son's tutor, tarnished Augusta's reputation. To make matters worse, Bute was married. Augusta became the target of public scorn and disdain from the aristocracy. Once Prince George reached adulthood, she withdrew from public life. Her son's ascension to the throne did little to restore her standing in society, although it must have brought her some comfort to see her son finally become king. The remainder of Augusta's life was spent in relative seclusion, away from the hostile gaze of the public. By the mid-18th century, she was gravely ill with throat cancer. She fought against death for several months, and by the last week of her life, she could neither eat nor speak, suffering from severe pain. Sensing that the end was near, Augusta signaled for her to be dressed beautifully and seated in a chair, so she could receive the king one last time in proper fashion. This became her final request. On the morning of February 8th, in the year 1772, at the age of 52, she was found dead by a servant in her chambers. Thank you all for your attention. Please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.